We are at Pride Fest 2024 in McDonald Park. Is it McDonald Park? McDonald Park in James Bay. And Camas has a wonderful little pop-up tent and bookshop. By the time you hear this, it'll be long gone. Otherwise, I'd say come down and see us, but hopefully you've already seen us. So we just wanted to record while we're here and just get a sense of what people think of Pride and what people think of the politics of Pride, because that seems to be going a little more under-discussed in these days of Pride Fests and Pride Parades. And with me is Soraya and Sean and Shay and Emma and Jay, and none of them want to be the first to be on the recording, so I'm just going to thrust this microphone in somebody's face and hope somebody says something. So who wants to talk about the politics of Pride and what they think of Pride events like this one in the 21st century? Oh, Shay, wonderful. Thank you so much for volunteering.
Thanks, Joel.
So yeah, just maybe talk a little bit about, because in some ways Pride is, I think in a lot of ways and in a lot of places become like almost apolitical.
Right.
So maybe if you could talk about your personal perception of the politics of Pride and LGBTQ liberation.
Yeah, for me, I think Pride is still very political. And just, kind of seeing some of the anti-queer, anti-trans rhetoric that's happening across North America right now. And I think it's important for us to remember the roots of Pride, being a riot and being a protest. And yeah, I think it's about remembrance as well as celebration. So I think it's great that we can all, be our freest, most authentic selves, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done so that we can all feel safe in the world.
How do you think the idea of gay liberation fits in with what we see now with just a lot of corporate sponsorship and a lot of the mainstreaming of this movement, which used to be very, very radical and very anti-establishment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something a lot of us struggle with, right? Like the corporate pride. For me, my question is always are these corporations actually doing anything to be more inclusive to queer and trans folks? And I think a lot of them aren't. It's very performative. And so sometimes it might look like progress. And I think there is some progress there, but I want more.
What would you like to see if you were, in charge of Pride Fest in Victoria? What changes would you make?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the reasons that I didn't really want to attend the parade was because it does always feel like it's kind of an advertisement for a lot of, businesses and corporations. And I think I'd like to see it be more grassroots, community-based, and not have as many of those big businesses there. Yeah, just more about community coming together.
Shay, how do you think Pride interacts with your anarchist beliefs and with your political activism as part of an anarchist book collective?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, like I said, I think it's about community coming together and supporting each other, and hopefully inviting people in who maybe don't know as much, and informing them about some of the issues that are happening for our community. Yeah, so kind of coming away from more of that top-down, approach, and trying to be more about the community and what we need and how we come together to support each other and keep each other safe and help each other thrive also.
Wonderful. Thanks, Shay. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You did great. Now somebody else who's just ripping the microphone out of my hand. We have another Camas collective member, Sean.
May as well get it over with.
Sean says he might as well get it over with. So Sean, same sorts of, I guess, questions or thoughts for you. What do you think the place of Pride is and Pride Fests are, given, the politics of Canada in 2024?
Yeah, so I think, mirroring what Shay had said, it's important to still have Pride because Pride is such a space for visibility and for connection and community for all sorts of people that express themselves in different ways. So having Pride is a really lovely event, and it's a nice way for people that are curious about how to express themselves fully, what the possibility is for how they can actualize themselves and be most happy. So having that community and connection is really lovely. Still, I will also reflect the point that it is unfortunate that it's very corporate based, because it would be much more beautiful if it was a more grassroots style system where we don't have, TD Bank, for example, at the very front of Pride, or any sort of like advertisements in the main parade, because then it takes a little bit away from the point, which is community and resistance and visibility and connecting with each other.
How does attending Pride or assisting with the tent at Pride, or even just having Pride Fest in Victoria, how does that interact with or inform your anarchist beliefs?
Yeah, so the way that my anarchy interacts with my pride is, I think anarchy is a system that really emphasizes the lack of any sort of hierarchy, and this is an important, or any sort of imbalance between people, and it really promotes equality for everybody. And as we see in politics today in Canada, a lot of people view, for example, trans identities or queer identities as less than cis identities or straight heterosexual identities, and anarchy rejects all of that and says, no, everybody is beautiful and lovely, and we can express ourselves fully and completely and be equals with each other. So that's how it interacts. And in regard to working at Camas or attending at Camas, it's a nice opportunity to have a lot of books, something I'm very passionate about, and discuss with people that maybe haven't seen the more anarchist or the more inclusive aspects of Pride, such as disability justice, such as racial justice, and neurodivergence justice. And so it's an opportunity for us to be at an event where it's a little bit corporate, but also sort of insert our grassroots tendrils, and maybe
just be a little subversive from the inside.
Yeah, be a little subversive from the inside, and promote the type of Pride that we want to see. So I think that's lovely.
Great. Thanks, Sean.
Of course.
Now, Jay, the moment they've been long awaiting.
Yes.
Hello.
Jay's another Camas Collective member. So, yeah, Jay, just same sorts of questions. How do you feel about Pride and the politics of Pride in 2024 Canada?
One thing I was thinking about hearing everyone else talk was being at this festival in the park. There's also, at least in the last couple of years, I haven't walked around yet today, but there's booths for diversity and inclusion, and for cops are here and trying to use this as an entry point to, and I'm thinking about how being here as Camas Books also provides an opportunity, or like an entry point for folks who might be coming to Pride without knowing the politics or the history behind it, and to be able to say, no cops at Pride, this is the reason why, this is the history why, this is based on, trans women of color, the Stonewall riots.
So I think another aspect to recognize with today's Pride is that 2 weeks ago or so, the City of Victoria in the Conference Centre, which is a public space, hosted an event that included a lot of reactionary far-right speakers who support conversion therapy, and who are taking on anti-SOGI, so anti-gender inclusive education rhetoric, and as well as other sort of more discriminatory belief systems. And we had gone to the City Hall and talked to the councillors about the overlap between not allowing far-right speakers to be having a platform in our cities, including the way that essentially keeping Victoria in line with its proposed values. So in some way, I see still the cities having these venues that are hosting alt-right speakers, and then Pride as a little bit hypocritical for the city. So I still think that we have a lot of work to do in this area.
Cool. Thank you, Sean. I am here with Gareth, who's a member of the Satanic Temple, and Gareth has kindly agreed to talk to me about his views on Pride and politics and how that interacts with his activism in the Satanic Temple. So Gareth, thanks for doing this.
Hi, welcome.
So if you could just give us an idea why you're at Pride Fest 2024.
So, okay, first off, I got to say that I do not represent, in this instance, I don't represent the main Satanic Temple organization. I'm just speaking for myself.
Great.
I am a non-theistic Satanist.
Can you tell us what that means?
Absolutely. We are, I personally, let me say, I am a non-theistic Satanist, which means that I do not believe that Satan is a literal being. Generally, what that means is that we consider the archetype of Satan, the literal, fictional, literary character Satan, as developed by the Romance authors. You may have heard of some of them, Shelley, Byron, etc., to be a figure worthy of, some interpretation and not, I will not say reverence because we don't believe he's real, but an inspiration.
Inspiration for what? For like what kind of liberation project? Because from what I understand of the Satanic Temple, it is about a liberation project.
So the Satanic Temple in the States, I can't speak for.
Okay.
Okay. And I am a member of TST British Columbia, and we largely don't. Not sure how to say all of this. there's a lot to think about here.
Is it my understanding though is that the Satanic Temple is about free speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion?
Most non-theistic Satanists are about those things. Yes. So we attend. I attend Pride events, for example. Members of the group that I'm with, we also attend Pride events for similar reasons. We believe that love is love, and that freedom is a wonderful thing. So.
And is that why you're here at Pride today?
Yeah, we're here to support the community. We love Pride. We've been, I have been to several events. I've attended several in New Westminster, Vancouver, and this is our first time here at Victoria.
What is the interaction between the Satanic Temple and being queer in Canada in 2024 and the struggles that people have being queer in Canada?
Generally,
2 and 4, yeah.
TST is I can't say that TST is anything. That's not what I'm going to say. I'm going to say for myself, and the way that I understand how this how non-theistic Satanism works. We are very inclusive. We have a great appreciation for variety and the spice of life and the pursuit of knowledge. And we recognize that people are people, that love is love, and there's a great variety of human life out there, and all of it is worthy of celebration.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Of course.
I am now here with Lane. Lane is a fantastic customer of Camas. She loves the bookstore, right, Lane?
Yes.
And she's agreed to talk to us a little bit about why she's here today. So, Lane, what brought you out to Pride Fest 2024?
I was walking with the UVSS, the University of Victoria Student Society. So I was doing their support work for their communications.
And what brought you to the idea of Pride? Like, what first got you involved in projects for, LGBTQ liberation?
Well, I'm a lesbian.
That'll do it.
That'll do it. Before I was a lesbian, I was a very avid ally, very enthusiastic ally. So big SJW kid growing up.
And we were talking off camera. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what you think of the politics of Pride, because we look around and we see Pride has become kind of corporatized. There's banks, there's booths with police officers, there's lots of for-profit businesses selling things for a profit. What do you think of that and how that fits into your view of LGBTQ liberation?
Well, I don't think it's I don't think TD is ever going to be the key to queer liberation. I think it's inherently contradictory. I think I struggle with the contradictions of even like participating in a like corporatized pride. What you have to balance is on the one hand, and we were having this conversation about the UVSS's presence, on the one hand, I think it's very important to be out there, and for young kids who are maybe graduating high school coming to UVic. Also, to be clear, UVSS isn't UVic, it's the student union for UVic, so a completely separate organization. I think it's important to be visible, and to have like young kids potentially from rural areas seeing that there is a space for them in post-secondary. But at the same time, you have to be aware of like what you are joining, and I think that's the constant balance that we have to have when we're like trying to practice like liberation politics, while also trying to get out there and make connections with young students. Like that is our purpose, to serve them and to make sure they're aware of our services.
Is there any intersection with LGBTQ liberation and Palestinian liberation, which is obviously in the news these days?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like we're capitalism, we're homophobia, we're colonialism, we're sexism, we're misogyny, we're racism. All of those things are interconnected inherently.
What do you think straight people, cis people can do to be better allies for members of this community?
Listen, actively listen, and broaden your scope of who you're listening to. Like I think when we're talking about corporate pride, it's one thing to like sort of passively consume the TD Pride commercials, and it's another thing to like actively support like grassroots like queer communities who are trying to organize. So I think it's important to listen to a variety of perspectives, as well as listening to like multiply marginalized folks who are organizing for queer liberation.
Great. Any final thoughts for anybody listening to our podcast about being queer, pride, Camas, anarchism?
I would say, let's go lesbians. I would say, yeah, being a lesbian and being able to organize as a student leader, as a lesbian student leader, and being able to be visible for my community in that way, and being able to like work with other queer students, other lesbian students, other trans students has been the honor of my life, and I hope to be able to do it. And I'm very proud to have like the next sort of generation and of students be able to continue that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lane. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
I'm here with my new friends, Keith, Dave, and Susan, and they've agreed to talk to me more about pride and politics and the politics of pride. So yeah, like I was saying to you lovely people off tape, I'm really curious about your take on the corporatization of pride and how pride has evolved away. Somebody like me would argue it's evolved away from its more liberatory project into much more of a mainstream consumer-oriented event. If anybody wants to start off.
Yeah, I mean, you look around here and see that there's banks here that are making money off of genocide currently in Gaza.
So for me, it's been interesting to be both in the parade as a participant and at this event, and have queer friends in the city who feel like this event doesn't represent them and their politics. But nevertheless, what you're talking about with the commodification of pride, I think, is actually the result of an internal contradiction of capitalism, where it will co-opt those revolutionary movements and spaces and identities. But nevertheless, I do continue to sense those nascent seeds of resistance within the corporatized pride, where folks refuse to forget the history of pride and continue to commemorate Stonewall. And so while we do exist in, again, like I said, that contradiction within capitalism, of which this is one, part of the project of pride now is to remember that as that history. And if it gets co-opted, so be it. I'm not worried. There will be more movements. There will be more liberatory spaces. And we will continue to remember that until all of us are free, none of us are free.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of that I don't want to paint the whole space with one brush. Like all movements are diverse and contain multiplicities. And it's true that pride has become like super corporatized, and there are banks trying to sell you mortgages at like little tents here. But there are also like radically anti-cop politics and like Palestinian liberation politics and like radical queer liberation that are really pushing boundaries. Movements are internally diverse, and I don't want to like erase the radical sides of pride by problematizing the corporate sides of it.
So you still think there is a radical side to Pride?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just bought a Boink the Cops t-shirt at a tent, Pride, right?
Camas tent, by the way.
It's not all CIBC and Scotiabank.
What do you talked about Palestine liberation, and I see you're wearing keffiyehs. What is the interaction? Because I know it's a complicated history between the causes of LGBTQ liberation and the causes of Palestinian liberation. One of the chief criticisms, or I should say one of the chief, I think, unfair weapons that people wield against Palestinian liberation causes is to say, oh, well, if you lived in Gaza and you were gay, you'd be stoned. Now, we all know that that's ridiculous, but what is your take on that sort of political interaction between these two different, but I think equally important struggles?
I mean, I guess I would say two things about that. One being I'm neither queer nor Palestinian, so I don't want to speak for either community. But for me, it goes back to what Susan said, that none of us are free until all of us are free. And that's as true of queer people as it is of Indigenous peoples around the world, like the Palestinians. So that's kind of what draws me into both movements and where I see the connections between them. And I guess the other thing is I do want to comment on the cynicism of folks who only seem to be, only seem to support queerness when they can weaponize it against Islam. That you see the same thing with feminism, that folks are only for women's rights when they can weaponize it against Muslims. And that's just blatantly Islamophobic and racist and imperialist. So if we can't be consistent in our liberatory politics, then do we have liberatory politics?
What do you all think is sort of the next stage of liberation for this particular community, for people who have what used to be considered non-mainstream views on gender and sex? What do you think the next stage of the struggle is or should be?
There is no next stage in that question. We're still fighting that fight. Look at the rising, not even rising, it's like fascist state, the province of Alberta, and the way they're treating our queer friends. Look at what's happening in the States. And it drives me bonkers when I hear the expression, well, at least we're not the States. So that doesn't mean that culture isn't porous.
It's a low bar.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that these really horrible fascistic ideas aren't going to infiltrate the minds of people. We see that in the way that the provincial election here suddenly has repopulated the BC Conservative Party. What does that tell you if not a slant towards increasingly fascistic right-wing tendencies? And so that fight was never over.
Yeah, and I do think, though, that younger generations are continuing to push the struggle in like new and more radical directions. Or I think for folks of my generation or a little bit older, we have a way of talking often about sexuality or gender as like a noun. It's like a state that you are. And I notice a lot of my younger comrades talk about it more as a verb.
That's
it's
interesting.
Like they can feel a little gayer today and a little straighter the next day and a little more feminine one day and a little more masculine the other day. And there's no contradiction in that. It's fluid, it's dynamic, it's an expression of who they are in the moment. And that strikes me as kind of like a progression from the way my generation looked at those things.
That's really interesting. I've never heard or thought about that before, because I think I'm much closer to your generation, probably a little bit older. But I think you're 100% right. That difference between nouns and verbs as a method of identity, I find that's just fascinating. I haven't heard that before.
And with respect to the younger generation too, they're kind of, I believe, organically creating where the movement is going. And so I watch their TikTok reels with absolute fascination, and I see that that's where culture is going, and I'm excited. And truth be told, even my own therapist has talked, and I talk about what is it to be straight in a queer world. And, through those conversations, I've realized that my seemingly identifying as straight is in itself a label that is inherently limiting. And so I've kind of started to see queer theory as quite liberatory for myself and breaking down my own silos of what it means to be cis or straight or what have you. And it's like, oh, maybe I'm not. Maybe I can be a little more gay today. And that's quite fun. And more I'm seeing things too about gender dysphoria, which has almost always exclusively been in the conversation with our trans comrades. but we experience gender dysphoria all the time. I mean, you see me, and I have really bright lipstick on, but if the lipstick didn't look good today, or if my hair didn't land straight, I feel like I'm not presenting femina. And then that is in itself gender dysphoric. And just acknowledging how the spectrum of identity has really broadened through this movement for me has frankly made me a better person in terms of wanting to fight the anti-imperial, anti-oppressive, anti-fascist struggles, because it really does show how our liberation is bound up within one another's.
Any final thoughts about Pride, the politics of Pride, today's experience, its place in, settler colonial British Columbia? Free Palestine? Palestine. All right now. Yeah, youthful liberation.
Check out Labor for Palestine. What other groups we got?
Shout out to the folks at the encampment up at the People's Park in Uvic. Shout out to People's Park.
Shout out to the folks who blockaded the parade today.
Yes. Were there people who blockaded the parade today? Can you tell us a little bit about that? I think people will be interested in hearing about it. What happened?
We were a bit further back, but they seem to have been kettled away from the parade and they rerouted around them. But I think the parade maybe stopped for about 10 to 15 minutes. And it was, if you didn't know where to look, I don't even think they were visible from the actual parade itself.
And these are pro-Palestine activists.
Pro-Palestine activists, yeah, queer pro-Palestine activists
and
as well.
To be fair, sorry. A rhetorical thing is, I'm actually really tired of pro-Palestine. I just want to call us all anti-genocide.
Yeah.
All right. What was the reaction of the people in the parade to the disruption?
There's a statement from the Victoria Pride Society saying that they agree to call for a permanent lasting ceasefire, work towards BDS, cutting cops out of Pride as much as possible, and ask Vic PD to stop sweeping unhoused before Pride events. And that's a statement they're going to make.
What is your reaction, if you care to respond, what's your reaction to that statement? Sincere, insincere, too far, not far enough?
Everything is going to feel too late, but it's the fact that it happens is all is really important. I felt good to see that. I saw PEI, Pride Society, recently also released something similar, and I was everything is mixed feelings when it comes to these sort of things.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me today.